I thought I was just helping a stranded trucker fix his tire on a rainy Tuesday morning. But what he left in my toolbox 3 weeks later made me realize that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest miracles. My name is Celeste Hartwell, and I run a tiny auto repair shop on Highway 89 in rural Montana. Most people drive right past my faded red garage without a second glance, but for those who break down on this lonely stretch of road, my shop becomes their lifeline. I never imagined that one morning in October would change everything I thought I knew about helping strangers. You see, I've been struggling to keep my father's business alive ever since he passed away 3 years ago. Every day feels like I'm fighting an uphill battle with a toolbox full of dreams and a bank account full of dust. I'm a single mom to my 8-year-old daughter, Wren, who spends her afternoons doing homework on my front counter while I crawl under broken-down cars, trying to squeeze every dollar I can from this place. The morning that changed my life started like any other. I was staring at my cash register, which held exactly $87 and some loose change, wondering how I was going to buy groceries that week. The bills were stacked on my desk like a house of cards ready to fall, and the bank had been calling about our overdue mortgage payments for weeks. I kept telling myself that Dad built this shop with his bare hands, and I wasn't about to let it die on my watch. But when that 18-wheeler pulled into my lot through the pouring rain, with its blown tire and desperate driver, I had no idea I was about to make a decision that would test every value my father ever taught me. I didn't know that the man climbing down from that cab was carrying more than just medical supplies in his trailer. He was carrying hope for families I'd never meet, including his own granddaughter whose life hung in the balance. What happened next would prove that sometimes when you give everything you have, even when you have almost nothing left to give, the universe has a way of making sure your kindness finds its way back to you in ways you never could have imagined. Let me tell you what life looked like before that rainy Tuesday changed everything. Picture this: a faded red garage sitting on the edge of nowhere, with a hand-painted sign that reads, Hartwell's Auto Repair, in letters my father carved himself 40 years ago. The paint is chipping now, and some days I catch myself wondering if that's a metaphor for everything else falling apart in my life. My father, Samuel Hartwell, built this place from nothing but determination and calloused hands. He used to tell me that every car that rolled through our doors carried someone's dreams, someone's family, someone's hope of getting to where they needed to be. Celeste, he'd say while teaching me to change oil when I was barely tall enough to reach the hood, we're not just fixing engines, sweetheart. We're fixing people's ability to chase their dreams. Dad died 3 years ago from a heart attack, right there in Bay 2, wrench still in his hand. I found him when I came to bring him lunch, and I swear he looked peaceful, like he was just taking a nap next to the old Chevy he'd been working on. The doctor said it was quick, that he didn't suffer, but I've been suffering enough for both of us ever since. Taking over the shop should have been a natural transition. I'd been working alongside Dad since I could walk, learning every bolt, every fluid, every trick he knew. But running a business is different from just fixing cars. There are insurance payments, equipment loans, property taxes, and a dozen other expenses that seem to multiply faster than I can count them. The highway doesn't see as much traffic as it used to, and the big chain shops in Billings have been stealing customers who used to be loyal to us. My daughter Wren is 8 years old and believes I can fix anything. She sits on that old red stool by the counter every day after school, working on her math homework while I work on whatever broken machine is limped into our lives. Sometimes she helps by handing me tools or holding flashlights, and she always asks a million questions about how engines work. She reminds me so much of myself at that age, curious and fearless and convinced that her parent has all the answers. What Wren doesn't know is that her father, my ex-husband Derek, walked out on us 2 years ago because he said I loved that garage more than I loved him. Maybe he was right. When he demanded I sell the shop and move to Seattle, where he'd gotten some corporate job, I couldn't do it. This place isn't just a business to me. It's my father's legacy, it's Wren's inheritance, and it's the only thing I know how to do well. Derek called me stubborn and selfish. He said I was choosing a pile of old metal over our marriage. The truth is, I was choosing the last piece of my father I had left. I was choosing the place where I learned that honest work matters, that helping people matters, that keeping your word matters even when it costs you everything. Derek couldn't understand that. So he left for his shiny new life and sends a check for child support when he remembers to. My older brother Thaddeus keeps offering to help with money, but he's got his own family to worry about. And besides, accepting his help feels like admitting I've failed. He runs a successful construction company in Great Falls and doesn't understand why I don't just sell the shop and get a normal job with benefits and a steady paycheck. Celeste, he tells me during our weekly phone calls, Dad wouldn't want you to sacrifice your future for his past. But this isn't about the past. It's about proving that good people still exist in this world, that there are still places where a handshake means something, where fixing someone's car means you care about getting them safely down the road. It's about showing Ren that women can build things, fix things, run things, and that giving up isn't an option when you're fighting for something that matters. The morning of October 15th started with me counting the money in our register twice, hoping the numbers would somehow change. They didn't. $87.34. I had enough to buy groceries or pay the electric bill, but not both. I sat there in Dad's old chair, looking at the stack of overdue notices, and asked him for a sign that I was doing the right thing by holding on to his dream. I had no idea that sign was about to pull into my parking lot in the form of an 18-wheeler with Illinois plates and a problem I couldn't ignore. The storm hit Montana like it had a personal grudge against anyone trying to make an honest living. Rain hammered the garage roof so hard I could barely hear Ren practicing her spelling words at the counter. The weather radio kept squawking about flash flood warnings and hazardous driving conditions, which meant more broken-down vehicles and more people needing help they couldn't afford. Around 10:30, I heard the deep rumble of a diesel engine struggling against the wind. Through the rain-streaked window, I watched a massive 18-wheeler pull into my lot, its hazard lights blinking like a distress signal. The truck was fighting to stay straight, clearly favoring one side, and I could see the problem before the driver even stepped out. The rear tire on the driver's side was completely shredded, hanging in black rubber strips like a flower that had given up on blooming. The man who climbed down from that cab looked like he'd been carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. He was probably in his late 50s, with silver hair plastered to his head from the rain and work boots that had seen better decades. His flannel shirt was soaked through, and when he walked toward my garage, I noticed his hands were shaking. Not from the cold, but from something deeper. Something that looked a lot like desperation. "Ma'am," he called out over the storm, "I'm hoping you can help me with a tire situation. Name's Porter McKinney, and I've got myself in a real bind here." I grabbed my jacket and stepped out into the rain to get a better look at the damage. The tire wasn't just flat, it was destroyed. Completely blown out, probably from hitting debris on the highway at speed. This wasn't a patch job or a quick fix. This was a full tire replacement, and on a rig that size, we were talking about an expensive commercial tire. "How long you been driving on it like this?" I asked, already knowing the answer wouldn't be good. "About 10 miles, Porter admitted, his voice tight with worry. I felt her blow, but I couldn't stop on the highway in this weather. I've been praying to make it to somewhere safe, and your garage was the first place I saw. I walked around to examine the trailer, and that's when I noticed the refrigeration unit humming steadily despite the chaos. This wasn't just any cargo. Porter was hauling something that needed to stay cold, something important enough to risk driving on a blown tire through a storm. "What are you carrying?" I asked. Porter's face changed, and I saw something break open in his expression. "Medical supplies," he said quietly. "Time-sensitive medications heading to 3 hospitals in Billings. I've got insulin, heart medications, and some experimental treatments for children's diabetes research. There are families waiting for this cargo, and I'm supposed to deliver it by 2 o'clock this afternoon." That's when I noticed his hands weren't just shaking from stress. They were shaking from fear. Real, bone-deep fear of letting people down when their lives might depend on him. "Ma'am, I need to be straight with you," Porter continued, and I could hear his voice starting to crack. "I've been driving for 32 years, never missed a delivery, never let anyone down. But 3 weeks ago, my granddaughter Faith needed emergency surgery for complications from juvenile diabetes. I spent every penny I had saved, including my emergency road fund, to help my daughter cover what insurance wouldn't pay." He pulled out his wallet and showed me exactly what I was afraid to see. Some crumpled bills that might have added up to $40 on a good day. I called the company, but they can't get roadside service out here for at least 4 hours. Maybe longer with this storm. The tire's going to cost around $200, and I just don't have it. But there are kids in those hospitals who need their medications, and one of them is my own granddaughter who's waiting for an experimental insulin treatment that's in my trailer right now. Standing there in the rain, looking at this man who was torn between his professional pride and his family's needs, I felt something twist in my stomach. I had $87 in my register. This repair would cost me about $60 in parts and labor, money I needed for groceries and Ren's school expenses. But Porter was carrying medicine that could save lives, including his own granddaughter's. The question wasn't whether I could afford to help him. The question was whether I could afford not to. I stood there in the pouring rain, water dripping off the brim of my baseball cap, staring at Porter McKinney and seeing my own reflection in his desperate eyes. This man was fighting the same battle I'd been fighting for 3 years, trying to hold on to dignity while the world seemed determined to strip it away piece by piece. The difference was his fight involved saving lives, including his own granddaughter's. My mind raced through the brutal math. $60 for parts and labor would leave me with $27 until my next customer, whenever that might be. $27 wouldn't buy much in the way of groceries, and Ren's school lunch account was already running low. I could practically hear my father's voice warning me about the dangers of running a business on emotion instead of logic. But then I looked at Porter's truck with its refrigeration unit working overtime to keep those medications stable, and I heard my father's voice saying something else entirely. I heard him telling 8-year-old me that sometimes doing the right thing costs more than you can afford, but not doing it costs more than you can live with. Let me take a look at what we're working with, I told Porter, already walking toward his truck. Pull her into Bay 1, and we'll get you back on the road. The relief that washed over Porter's face was worth more than any payment he could have offered. Ma'am, I need to tell you up front, I can't pay you what this is worth right now. I know that puts you in a terrible position, but I'm hoping maybe we can work out some kind of arrangement. Don't worry about payment right now, I said, grabbing my hydraulic jack and rolling it toward the truck. Let's focus on getting those medications to where they need to be. Porter helped me guide the massive truck into the garage bay, and I got to work immediately. The blown tire was worse than I'd initially thought. The sidewall was completely destroyed, and there was damage to the rim that needed addressing. This wasn't going to be a quick fix. I called my parts supplier, Jerry Martinez, who runs the automotive store in town. Jerry, I need a commercial. Tire size 295 75R 22.5, and I need it now, I said, trying to keep the urgency out of my voice. Celeste, you know I've got to have payment up front for the big stuff, Jerry replied. That tire's going to run you $230. Jerry, I've got a trucker here carrying medical supplies to sick kids in Billings. This is life or death stuff. Can you work with me here? There was a pause. Then Jerry's voice softened. You know what? Bring me $60 now, and we'll call the rest a shop credit. Your dad was good to me over the years, and I know you're fighting to keep that place going. While I waited for Jerry to deliver the tire, I worked on cleaning up the rim damage and checking the other tires for safety. Porter stood nearby, alternately pacing and checking his watch. Every few minutes he'd update me on the time and remind me how critical this delivery was. My granddaughter Faith is part of a clinical trial, he explained while I worked. She's been struggling with juvenile diabetes, and this experimental insulin could change everything for her. The crazy thing is, some of that exact medication is sitting in my trailer right now, heading to the research hospital where she's being treated. The irony wasn't lost on me. Porter was literally carrying hope for his own family, but he couldn't access it because he was just the messenger, not the recipient. It reminded me of my own situation, surrounded by tools and skills that could fix anything except my own financial problems. By noon, I had the new tire mounted and was torquing the lug nuts to specification. Porter watched every move I made, his anxiety evident in every gesture. When I finally lowered the jack and rolled it away, He practically ran to inspect my work. "Ma'am, I don't know how to thank you for this," Porter said, his voice thick with emotion. "You just saved more than my job today. You might have saved lives." "It's Celeste," I said, wiping grease off my hands with an old shop rag, "and this is what neighbors do for each other." "What do I owe you?" Porter asked, even though we both knew he couldn't pay. I looked at this man who'd spent 32 years keeping his word, who'd emptied his savings to help his granddaughter, who was carrying medicine to children he'd never meet. "Just promise me you'll pay it forward someday when you're able to help someone else." 3 weeks passed like a slow-motion nightmare. The garage limped along on fumes and prayer, and I found myself counting pennies like they were precious stones. I'd helped 2 more stranded motorists since Porter left, including an elderly woman whose radiator hose burst and a college student whose alternator died on his way home for his mother's birthday. Each time I charged barely enough to cover parts, telling myself that karma would eventually balance the books. It didn't. The bank called twice about the mortgage, the electric company sent a final notice, and I started having conversations with Ren about what we might do if we had to close the shop. She listened with the serious expression of a child who understands more than she should, then told me she believed in miracles because her teacher said they happen to people who help others. Friday afternoon, October 28th, started like any other day of barely hanging on. I was sitting at Dad's old desk, calculator in one hand and a stack of bills in the other, trying to figure out which creditor could wait another week. The math wasn't working. It never worked anymore. That's when I heard the rumble of the FedEx truck pulling into the lot. I glanced up, expecting to see a delivery for the auto parts store next door that sometimes got misdirected to my address. Instead, the driver walked straight to my door, clipboard in hand and a large express envelope under his arm. "Delivery for the Angel at Hartwell's Auto Repair," he announced, checking his paperwork twice. "I think you've got the wrong address," I said, wiping my hands on my coveralls. "Nobody calls this place that. This is 847 Highway 89, Hartwell's. Auto repair, right? The signature says it's for the Angel. That's what I've got written down." My hands trembled as I signed for the package. The return address showed no company name, just an address in Springfield, Illinois, Porter's state. My heart started beating faster as I tore open the envelope, and what I found inside made me sink into Dad's chair like my legs had forgotten how to hold me up. The letter was handwritten in careful script on plain white paper, but it was the cashier's check that made me gasp out loud. $15,000. I read the amount 3 times, certain I was hallucinating from stress and too much caffeine. "Dear Celeste," the letter began, "I told you I wouldn't forget your kindness, and I meant every word. The medications you helped me deliver that rainy Tuesday included experimental insulin for children's diabetes research. One of those vials was destined for my granddaughter Faith, who was part of a clinical trial at Billings Children's Hospital. Because you got me back on the road that day, she received her treatment on schedule." My vision blurred as I continued reading. The experimental insulin worked better than anyone dared hope. Faith's blood sugar levels have stabilized for the first time in 2 years, and her doctors are calling her response remarkable. She's going to live a normal, healthy life because a stranger in Montana decided that helping people matters more than protecting her own wallet. The letter went on to explain that Porter had sold his truck to the transportation company where he'd worked for 3 decades. They'd offered him a management position that would keep him closer to home and his family. The money from the truck sale was more than he'd expected, and he'd spent weeks asking around town about me and my situation. "I know about your father's legacy, your struggles with the shop, and your daughter who believes you can fix anything. I also know that angels shouldn't have to choose between helping others and paying their own bills. This money isn't charity, Celeste. It's an investment in proving that good people still exist in this world." The letter concluded with news that made my heart nearly stop. "By the way, Faith asked me to tell you that she wants to be a mechanic when she grows up, just like the lady who saved her grandfather's job and maybe her life too. Your father would be proud of the woman you've become and the values you're passing on to your daughter." I sat there in that empty garage, clutching a check that represented more money than I'd seen in years, and cried like I hadn't cried since Dad died. This wasn't just about the money. This was about validation that everything I'd been fighting for mattered. Every sleepless night, every skipped meal, every time I chose helping someone else over protecting myself had led to this moment. When Ren walked in from school and found me sobbing at the desk, she rushed over with 8-year-old urgency. "Mom, what's wrong? Are we okay?" I pulled her into my arms and held her tight. "Baby, we're more than okay. We just learned that miracles really do happen to people who help others." The first thing I did with Porter's gift was pay off every overdue bill sitting on Dad's desk. The second thing I did was take Ren out for the first real dinner we'd had in months, at Tony's Diner, where she ordered a chocolate milkshake with her burger and didn't have to share it with me to make it last longer. Watching her face light up over something so simple made me realize how much we'd both been sacrificing without even talking about it. But the real changes started the next Monday morning when I opened the garage with a different kind of energy. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't looking at each day as a fight for survival. I was looking at it as an opportunity to build something meaningful. The weight that had been sitting on my chest since Dad died finally started to lift, and I could breathe again. I used part of Porter's money to upgrade the garage equipment that had been held together with hope and duct tape for too long. New hydraulic lifts, better diagnostic tools, and a tire mounting machine that didn't require a prayer and 2 aspirin every time I used it. But more importantly, I established something I called the Hartwell Helper Fund with $5,000 of Porter's gift. The fund was simple. When someone came to me broken down and broke, really broke, I could help them without emptying my own pockets. Word spread through the trucking community faster than I expected. Drivers started telling other drivers about the garage on Highway 89 where they'd be treated fairly, where someone would help them even if their wallet was as empty as their gas tank. My brother Thaddeus drove down from Great Falls when he heard about my good fortune. He found me under the hood of a minivan, helping a single mother whose transmission had given up the ghost on her way to a job interview. "So the stubborn little sister who wouldn't take my help is now helping everyone else," he said, but he was smiling when he said it. "Dad would be proud of you, Celeste, not for keeping the garage open, but for keeping his values alive." 3 months after Porter's letter arrived, my phone rang with an area code I recognized. It was him, asking if he and his granddaughter could stop by the garage during their Christmas vacation trip to Montana. They wanted to meet the woman who'd made such a difference in their lives. When Porter walked into my garage that December afternoon, he looked like a different man. The stress lines around his eyes had softened, and he moved with the confidence of someone who'd found his place in the world. Behind him walked a girl with bright eyes and Porter's same determined chin, carrying a drawing she'd made of a woman in coveralls fixing a big truck. "Celeste, this is Faith," Porter said, his voice full of pride. "Faith, this is the angel I told you about." "I'm not an angel," I told her, kneeling down to her level. "I'm just a mechanic who believes in helping people." "Grandpa says you saved his job and maybe my life too," Faith said with the serious tone of a child who understood more than most adults. "I want to learn how to fix cars like you do. I want to help people too." We spent the afternoon together, 4 people from different generations connected by a single act of kindness that had rippled out in ways none of us could have imagined. Ren and Faith became instant friends, bonding over their shared belief that their mothers could fix anything. Porter and I talked about the trucking industry, about raising daughters to be strong and independent, and about how sometimes the best investments are the ones you make in people. Before they left, I gave Faith a child-sized wrench set and my father's old shop manual. "Your grandfather taught me that we're not just fixing engines," I told her. "We're fixing people's ability to chase their dreams." 6 months later, I put up a small wooden sign next to Dad's original one. It reads, "Kindness costs nothing but means everything," in memory of Samuel Hartwell. Under it, in smaller letters, "Home of the Hartwell Helper Fund, paying it forward since 2023. The garage is busier now than it's been in years, but more than that, it feels alive again. It feels like the place Dad always intended it to be, a place where broken things get fixed and broken people find hope. Every morning when I unlock those doors, I remember that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest miracles. And the best way to honor that miracle is to keep creating more of them.